Every day, without realizing it, we say things to our children that quietly shape who they become. We say these words with love. We say them to encourage, protect, or motivate. We repeat them because they sound right, because we heard them growing up, because everyone says them. But what most parents don't know is this. Some of the most common phrases parents use are silently destroying a child's inner motivation. Not in obvious ways, not overnight, but slowly, subtly, over time. If your child gives up easily, if they're afraid of making mistakes, if they constantly seek approval, if they lose motivation quickly, if they struggle with frustration, confidence, or emotional balance, the problem may not be discipline, temperament, or effort. The problem may be language. Because a child's brain doesn't just hear words, it absorbs them. It turns repeated phrases into beliefs. It turns tone into emotional memory. It turns everyday language into identity. What you say today becomes the voice your child hears inside their head years from now. In this video, based on neuroscience, developmental psychology, and the work of child psychologist Tinyang Andenyang, we're going to break down 10 extremely common phrases parents say every day. Phrases that sound positive, supportive, and responsible, but that actually weaken resilience, reduce motivation, increase anxiety, and shut down a child's natural drive to grow. And most importantly, you'll learn what to say instead. Not theory, not vague advice. Real, science-backed language shifts you can start using immediately. Because motivation does not come from pressure. It comes from safety. Confidence does not come from praise. It comes from competence. Resilience does not come from control. It comes from emotional support paired with trust. And all of that begins with how we speak. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the Parenting Blueprint, and share in the comments if there's already a phrase you've caught yourself saying more often than you'd like. This channel exists to help parents raise emotionally strong, motivated, confident children, not perfect ones. And if you want to go even deeper, remember that this channel also offers a membership with 2 levels, created for parents who want exclusive content, early access to videos, deeper explanations, and practical tools you can actually use at home. Membership is the best way to support the channel and become part of a growing community of intentional, informed parents. Now let's begin with one of the most misunderstood phrases of all, the sentence that sounds incredibly positive on the surface, but has been shown to reduce motivation over time. You're so smart. Most parents say this to build confidence, but the child's brain hears something very different. Instead of "I can grow," the message becomes "I must protect this image." The child learns that being smart is an identity to maintain, not a process to develop. Mistakes become dangerous. Challenges feel risky. Effort starts to disappear. And from that moment on, motivation quietly shifts from internal curiosity to external validation. And this is only the first phrase. In the next part, we'll look at what happens when we tell children to stop crying, and why this single sentence can disconnect a child from their emotions for years to come. Another phrase that almost every parent uses, often automatically, is "stop crying." It's usually said in moments of stress, urgency, or discomfort. We say it because we want our child to calm down, to cope, to move on. But the child's brain doesn't hear guidance. It hears dismissal. To a developing nervous system, "stop crying" translates into "your feelings are not acceptable right now." From a neuroscience perspective, this is critical. A child's emotional brain develops long before their logical brain. When emotions rise, the thinking brain goes offline. Crying is not manipulation. It is regulation in progress. When we interrupt that process with commands instead of support, we don't teach emotional control. We teach emotional suppression. And suppressed emotions don't disappear. They resurface later as anxiety, anger, withdrawal, or emotional numbness. Children who repeatedly hear "stop crying" often learn one of 2 things. Either they shut down emotionally to avoid rejection, or they escalate their emotions because they don't feel understood. Neither outcome builds resilience. The emotional intelligence is built when a child learns that feelings are safe to experience and manageable with support. The language we use in those moments determines whether the nervous system learns regulation or fear. Another phrase that quietly creates anxious thinkers is "be careful." On the surface, it sounds protective, but repeated constantly, especially in non-dangerous situations, it trains the brain to scan for threat. A child climbing, exploring, experimenting, or trying something new hears "be careful," not as guidance, but as a warning that something is likely to go wrong. Over time, curiosity is replaced with caution. Confidence is replaced with hesitation. Children need information, not fear. When we replace vague warnings with specific guidance, the brain stays calm and engaged. Instead of creating anxious avoidance, we build problem-solving and body awareness. This shift alone can dramatically change how a child approaches challenges. Then there's "hurry up." Few phrases dysregulate a child's nervous system faster. Adults feel time pressure cognitively. Children feel it physiologically. When rushed, their brain doesn't speed up, it shuts down. The stress response activates, coordination drops, mistakes increase, and behavior often worsens. What looks like defiance or laziness is often overwhelm. Repeated rushing teaches children that their natural pace is wrong, that their body signals are inconvenient. Over time, this can weaken self-trust and increase stress sensitivity. Calm urgency works, pressure does not. Another damaging phrase is "let me do it for you." We usually say it when we're tired or short on time. But what the child's brain learns is not efficiency, it learns incompetence. Each time we take over too quickly, we send the message, "You can't handle this." Motivation thrives on mastery. When children are allowed to struggle safely, confidence grows. When struggle is removed, motivation erodes. All of these phrases have something in common. They interrupt the child's internal learning process. They replace growth with control, safety with pressure, guidance with judgment. Some of the most powerful phrases we use with children don't just influence behavior in the moment, they shape identity. These are the sentences that quietly answer a child's unspoken question, "Who am I?" And once identity takes root, motivation follows it. One of the most common identity-shaping phrases is "you're just shy," or "that's just how you are." Parents usually say this to explain behavior or protect a child from pressure. But the child's brain hears something permanent. Instead of seeing a behavior that can change, they see a trait that defines them. The brain loves certainty, so it accepts the label and begins to act in alignment with it. Over time, a temporary phase becomes a fixed identity, and motivation to stretch beyond it quietly fades. The same happens with phrases like "you're the smart one," "you're the difficult one," or "you're the sensitive one." Even positive labels can limit growth. When a child believes their value is tied to a role, they begin to protect that role instead of exploring who they could become. Mistakes feel dangerous. Growth feels risky. Motivation shifts from curiosity to self-protection. Another phrase that damages inner drive is "why can't you be more like your brother?" Comparison may be intended as encouragement, but it creates competition where connection should be. The brain interprets comparison as threat to belonging, threat to worth. Instead of motivating improvement, it triggers shame or resentment. A child motivated by comparison is not internally driven. They are externally pressured, and that pressure erodes resilience over time. Then there's "I'm disappointed in you." This sentence hits directly at attachment. Children depend on parental approval for emotional safety. When disappointment is framed as relational rather than behavioral, the child doesn't hear "that choice wasn't okay." They hear "I am not okay." The nervous system responds with fear, not learning. True growth happens when correction is separated from identity, and boundaries are paired with reassurance. Another subtle but harmful phrase is "you always do this," or "you never listen." These absolute statements lock children into patterns instead of helping them change them. The brain responds by giving up. If always and never are already decided, effort feels pointless. Motivation thrives on the belief that change is possible. Language that removes that belief shuts motivation down. What all of these phrases share is this: they move the child's focus away from growth and towards self-judgment. They turn learning into identity defense. And when a child is busy defending who they are, they stop exploring who they could become. The alternative is language that keeps identity flexible and behavior adjustable. Language that says, "This is something you're learning," rather than, "This is who you are." When children feel safe to change, motivation returns naturally. In the next section, we'll explore what happens when praise and discipline unintentionally hijack motivation, and how to replace them with language that builds lasting inner drive instead of short-term compliance. Many parents believe motivation comes from praise and consequences, but psychology shows that how we praise and how we discipline can either strengthen inner drive or quietly destroy it. One of the most common phrases that undermines motivation is "I'm proud of you," when it's used as a reward rather than a reflection. Pride itself isn't harmful, but when children learn to perform for pride, their motivation shifts outward. They begin to ask, "Will this make them proud?" instead of, "Is this meaningful to me?" When praise is tied to outcomes, speed, or perfection, children stop listening to their own internal signals. They chase approval. Over time, this creates kids who work hard only when someone is watching, who struggle with self-direction, and who feel lost without external validation. True motivation grows when children feel ownership over their efforts, not when success is measured through someone else's emotional response. Another phrase that quietly shuts motivation down is "because I said so." This sentence may create immediate compliance, but it blocks understanding. Children don't just need rules, they need meaning. When the brain understands why a boundary exists, it integrates the value behind it. When the explanation is removed, the rule feels arbitrary, and motivation becomes dependent on authority rather than internal reasoning. Similarly, phrases like "if you don't do this, you won't get that" turn cooperation into transaction. This trains the brain to work for reward or avoid punishment, not to act from values, responsibility, or self-respect. External motivators work in the short term, but they weaken long-term drive. Children raised on constant incentives often struggle to initiate tasks independently because their brain waits for a payoff. Another damaging pattern appears when parents say, "You know better." This phrase assumes intent instead of capacity. It tells the child that failure is a moral flaw rather than a skill gap. Instead of asking, "What do I need to learn?" the child thinks, "Something is wrong with me." Shame replaces curiosity, and motivation collapses under self-judgment. What children actually need is language that separates behavior from worth and effort from outcome. When a child hears that effort matters, that mistakes are information, and that learning is ongoing, their brain stays engaged. Motivation becomes intrinsic. They act because it feels meaningful, not because it's demanded. This is where emotion coaching language becomes powerful. Naming effort, describing strategies, acknowledging difficulty without rescuing. These are the phrases that activate the brain's motivation systems. They tell the child, "You are capable, you are learning, you are safe to try." The most important shift in parenting language is this: we stop trying to control behavior and start shaping the inner world. Words are not just communication tools. They are instructions the brain uses to decide who it is allowed to become. When a child hears language rooted in fear, pressure, labels, or urgency, their nervous system learns to protect itself. But when a child hears language rooted in safety, effort, and possibility, their brain stays open, flexible, and motivated. This is why changing just a few phrases can transform everything. Not because children suddenly behave better, but because they feel safer, trying, failing, and growing. Motivation doesn't need to be forced when it is protected. Confidence doesn't need to be inflated when it is built. Resilience doesn't need to be demanded when it is modeled and supported. When you replace "you're so smart" with language that honors effort, your child learns that growth is possible. When you replace "stop crying" with emotional acknowledgement, your child learns regulation instead of shame. When you replace "be careful" with guidance, your child learns confidence instead of fear. When you slow down instead of rushing, the nervous system settles and cooperation increases. When you remove labels, comparisons, and absolutes, identity stays flexible and curiosity survives. And here's the part many parents find relieving. You don't need to fix everything at once. Children don't need perfect language. They need enough moments of safety, repair, and encouragement for their brain to trust the world again. Even when you slip back into old phrases, repairing the moment teaches just as much as getting it right the first time. Before we wrap up, if this video has helped you see your words differently, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the Parenting Blueprint, and share in the comments which phrase you're going to stop using first. Your experience may help another parent realize they're not alone and that change is possible. Remember, parenting transformation does not start with discipline systems, reward charts, or pressure. It starts with language, with the words your child hears when they're calm and especially when they're struggling. Those words become the voice that guides them long after you're no longer in the room. You are not just raising a child, you are shaping a future adult's inner dialogue. Choose words that build courage, not fear. Growth begins there.